Teachers of Reddit, what generation did you like teaching most? 80s, 90s, oh, why? By AskReddit.
Jesus, I've only taught in the 10s. How long do teachers live for? I'll be surprised to make it to next year.
Lol. If you teach a full-length career's worth, you might end up teaching the children of former students. I had 2 teachers in high school that taught my parents when they were there. My girlfriend's mom is a middle school teacher and she mentioned that kids are way more compassionate today, but they drastically lack social skills.
That makes sense. I tend to think that happens because the students spend so much time listening to people talking to their phone about their fears and insecurities but are accustomed to students volunteering that information.
I think kids just have a much tougher time understanding how to appropriately socialize with people like teachers or others removed from their social circle. Each group of people is now so unique they've developed their own culture, memes, and way of talking to each other. So I'm guessing what she's observing is the literal panic and anxiety kids get when they realize that they're a total fish out of water with some people.
As a kid myself, I definitely notice a lot of people are super comfortable and talk all the time in their friend group but are quiet, shy with other PPL, especially adults.
My mum has been teaching for about 25 years. She says students haven't changed. Parents have.
How old are her kids?
Early elementary.
Op has very good Reddit skills for being in elementary school.
I knew someone was going to make the joke.
It's not the kind of thing I usually catch, so seeing it felt like both a find and a solemn obligation.
Oh, elaborate, please.
My wife is a teacher. Her school has wealthy parents and poor alike due to how district transfers work. I'm also in education but not a teacher, so I work with a lot of teachers too, plus my wife's friends are around me enough. This is a small subset of parents, but it's definitely the vocal minority that stands way the F out. The parents with money are the absolute goddamn worst. They think their children are the most special poos on the planet. They can do no wrong. And their failure of ADK kid has zero accountability for their actions. They blame the teachers for everything. Contact the principal and district to complain about the smallest of things. The list goes on and on. I get pissed typing it. I've read the emails my wife has shown me, and I've seen emails pop up on the computers I work on. I'm the exchange admin, and it's like a steady stream of abuse sometimes.
I'm a teacher in a wealthy majority white suburb. Everything this guy says is the honest-to-God gospel truth. This year in particular is the worst because there are zero consequences for any behavior and zero follow-through on any policies. The way I am treated on a daily basis by parents fills me with a sickening rage that I have no choice but to internalize. I thus go home and sob, binge eat comfort food, and lay in bed staring blankly at Reddit once dinner's over. I have lost my self-esteem, I have no confidence, I am crippled by anxiety over when the next angry parent will show up in my inbox or worse, in my admins. I monitor everything I say because I've seen how it can be twisted into a contortion of lies and you become some bored housewife's target.
If you aren't exaggerating, you either need to get your admin on your side and understand your situation or quit. It's not worth your health.
Not op and not a teacher, but my friends are. According to them, and they're relaying the perspectives of older colleagues, parents today are more likely to perceive their children as little angels. If a student today gets a bad grade, the teacher will bear the brunt. In generations past, the student would be the one receiving extra help and/or discipline. Obviously this doesn't apply to everyone, and maybe op meant something completely different, but that's what I've heard from those in the education system.
My friend is a third-grade teacher and she says the same thing. First off, it's impossible to actually fail a student nowadays. You get a passing C no matter what, even if the student doesn't turn in one assignment. And she said the parents are the worst part of the job. If for some reason the child is behind, misbehaving, etc., the parents assume it's the teacher's fault and go to higher-ups to get them in trouble.
Absolutely agree. I am a school administrator and parents call to complain or demand to speak with the principal about the dumbest stuff. My child is upset because the teacher never calls on her. I want to speak with the principal. My child lost her bracelet at school. You guys have to go look for it. There was a fire drill and it was cold. My child said she couldn't get her jacket. I want to speak with the principal. I'm upset about this teacher's tone of voice. I want to speak with the principal. I wish I could remember some of the more ridiculous ones. Most of the time when I ask parents what happened in their conversation with teachers, they say they didn't even bother talking to them about it. I think it's good that parents are more skeptical about what happens in a teacher's classroom. When I was a kid, my parent had the opposite attitude, and I did have some teachers that were totally in the wrong. But it's gone too far the other way. Many of my parents have no sense of personal responsibility for themselves or instilling it in their children, and it is the worst part of the job.
This will be buried, but I have the be-all and all parent complaint. Parent called in to complain their daughter was being bullied on the bus. The secretary apologized and informed her that students should be sitting in seats with their siblings only due to COVID. The mother agreed that her daughter had been sitting with her brothers. The secretary asked who was picking on the daughter, and the mum informed her it was the girl's brothers. The secretary told her she would need to take care of the issue in their home. Face with rolling eyes.
Absolutely effing ridiculous, and also something that would happen at my school. The bus used to take up so much of our time when it came to complaints and bullying. COVID has done wonders, because now we went from 120 kids to like 25 actually using the bus.
University professor here. When I started teaching in the early students still got even my most obscure Simpsons and 80s film references. By the late I had nothing left to reference. By the early 2010s my kid had reached adolescence, so I had new material, but it really wasn't mine, and the culture had splintered so much that my Rick and Morty references only hit about 30% of the class. Lately I just stopped trying, and became that old, out-of-touch professor. I lived long enough to become the villain. Edit. Thank you everyone so much for your words of encouragement and understanding. The response was overwhelming, and very welcome. You've made an old Gen Xer unironically feel feelings, and as those of you in my generation know, that's a genuine accomplishment. I will start making my references again, if only for that one student who gets them. Cheers and love. Heart.
I used to be with it, then they changed what it was. Now what I'm with isn't it, and what is it seems weird and scary to me. It'll happen to you.
Are my references out of date? No, it's the children that are wrong.
I feel like there is no pop culture to reference anymore. I mean, back in the pre-2000s, we all watched the same shows, went to the same movies, listened to the same songs on the radio, because that was the only way to consume those pieces of media. There was no YouTube or Netflix or Spotify. There was maybe 3 to 24 TV stations, depending on the era, whatever movies were available at your local theater or video store, rental place, and whatever music was playing on the radio, and if you didn't like what was on offer, you really had to hunt to find alternatives. You didn't have access to whatever media you want, whenever you wanted it, usually at zero cost. You watched, listened to whatever everyone else was watching, listening to, or you sat in your room and read a book. Those were really your only options. Now everything is so splintered, because people can completely tailor their media intake to their own specific tastes. I can stream Seberg 1000 background music from the 60s, watch an obscure foreign cartoon that never got an English release, and play an indie video game from an indie company that only survives thanks to the internet, all on whatever schedule one set. That was simply not feasible just 20 years ago. And it's nice, because we all get to do what we like, but it also means that you lose some of that social cohesion, because even the popular shows don't have nearly the same cultural penetration they once did. I remember the days when the series finales of popular shows like Friends or Seinfeld or Newhart were so important to the cultural zeitgeist they got tons of media coverage both leading up to them and in review after they'd happened. When was the last time a TV series did that? Even currently popular shows like The Mandalorian are only hitting a small chunk of the population. Back in the 80s and 90s, I could tell you what songs and artists were popular, even if I didn't like them, because I heard them everywhere. It was impossible to get away from them when you hopped in your buddy's car and went to the mall. Now, I don't even know what kind of music is popular, never mind who the big artists are or what their big hits are. With less and less of our time being spent at common gathering places and more of it spent online, something that long predates the pandemic, there isn't nearly as much of an environment for that pop culture cross-pollination that mega-hits depend on.
Great write-up. You absolutely nailed it. The internet is unimaginably vast, and there's a niche for everything and everyone. But sometimes it feels lonelier than ever, because now what really ties us together? What ties me to my neighbor, or my town, or even my country? Besides a shared geographical location.
It is something I occasionally ponder too. Even down to video games. You used to have localized communities. Like a local community forum, servers, and IRC. Now all the social bits are baked into the product and it becomes just one large global community that no longer feels tight-knit emo.
You know what the saddest thing is? Is that the younger generation you're describing are actually acutely aware of this. Of how anticlimactic and almost disappointing everything seems to feel now in comparison to previous generations' pop culture. You've articulated something for me that I couldn't even express because I wasn't alive to experience it. I could just sort of subconsciously feel it. I'm 21 and I've talked about it with my peers before so many times. How it feels like we're in a culturally creative slump, how there's no real icons or rock stars anymore, how even major albums or films that are released have such a negligible impact on people. I'm not trying to sound edgy or overly pretentious here. I recognize there's still brilliant art being produced today, but increasingly it feels so detached from the mainstream as to feel almost insignificant, or perhaps, as you say, the mainstream is just so fragmented that nothing ever reaches that same sort of mass exposure anymore. It's particularly noticeable in today's music, I feel. I'm from the UK, and even looking at the British music scenes or movements that appeared when my parents were my age in the 80s and 90s, it makes me so jealous. I mean, you had post-punk, new wave, new romantics, synthpop, ska revival, heavy metal, Manchester, acid house, rave, shoegazing, indie rock, Britpop and many more. The national cultural output in the past decade in particular just doesn't seem to compare. The fact that big artists from my parents' youth still headline festivals for people my age seems like a sad highlight of that. I just yearn for the same sense of having big mainstream art that taps into the social zeitgeist, manages to really capture my generation's mood, makes me feel represented in some great, interconnected, validating way. Because so far I feel like nothing so far really has.
You're absolutely right, I think. For 10 years Avatar was the highest grossing movie of all time. Yeah, lots of people saw it. But it had absolutely zero lasting cultural legacy. Disney, Fox are going to be in a world of hurt when the 15 sequels James Cameron has been filming since Forever Ago land with the impact of a wet fart. It seemed like Game of Thrones might have punched through sometimes, but the last season effectively erased it from relevance. It's great, I guess, that everyone has something to be interested in. But there is something very sad and lonely about lacking any cultural touchstones that everyone at least knows about.
For 10 years Avatar was the highest grossing movie of all time. Yeah, lots of people saw it, but it had absolutely zero lasting cultural legacy, just my opinion, but I think Avatar didn't have much cultural impact because it was not a great or original film. It was a solid movie that was good to look at, eye candy, but it was basically Dances with Wolves rewritten as an alien flick. White man colonize some native land and wreck the culture or something like that. It's been ages since I saw it, so I can't remember the details. I didn't dislike it, but remember thinking it was way overrated at the time despite the fact that I love sci-fi, fantasy, and those kinds of films generally speaking.
This is slowly becoming me. I'm an elder millennial 83 professor for whom your culture splintering term rang a huge bell. Back in my day everyone watched The Simpsons, and if you didn't, that's a paddlin'. Now, I mean, I try to stay remotely with it. Sometimes late at night I'll get a little high and put on some memes videos, trying, of course, not to wake the wife or kid, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to the fire hose of other people's lives that these kids are consuming. And if that all isn't bad enough, one recent student eval was simply, super nice guy, excellent professor, outdated cultural references but good dad jokes.
You'd be like a cool super young dad if these students were actually your kids, though 38 with 20 years old kids? I have realized that many teenagers of present don't understand how fast culture went in 20 years. I work with kids, and when we reference sending an email, this 15 years old spat out, sending emails? Who does that? That's like so 90s. Lol, WTF? Who was sending emails in the 90s? People still used effing typewriters and that wispy thin airmail paper in the 1990s. Like email for the masses, and not the AOL, Yahoo, CoolChat crowd just happened, but they think this technology is like a lot older than it really is. Like dude, we had records, cassette tapes, CDs, burned CDs, MP3s and streaming in 20 years. Sorry, most kids from the 80s didn't use 8 tracks, but we know what records are. We hit an acceleration moment in culture that is difficult for them to understand at times.
I remember PCs going from floppy, to CDs, to DVDs, and I'm pretty sure that zip drives were a thing for a hot second. Never mind stuff like Laserdisc that existed for an even hotter second. And then of course USB sticks, which have stuck around and just slowly improved in size and speed over the years, and I was born in '88. Stuff doesn't stick around long. I remember when SSDs were new. Now we have NVMe SSDs that make those early things look like slowpokes. Hell, 3D TVs came and went in the past decade. VR is the new big thing that looks like it might stick around. Might. Hell, I remember cell phones. First they were a brick. Then they shrunk somewhat. By high school they were flip phones. By end of college they were smartphones and everything was using touchscreens. Only then did things seem to finally calm down for a bit. Faster and thinner, but the general concept has remained the same so far. The past decade has been absurd.
I remember PCs going from floppy, to CDs, to DVDs, and I'm pretty sure that zip drives were a thing for a hot second. The reference to zip drives reminded me of when Omega stock was the GameStop of the 90s. https://finance.yahoo.com/news/day-market-history-iomegas-incredible-152207943.html. Remember people gloating about how much money they were going to make on Omega stock until it dropped.
It's the technology boom. Things accelerate exponentially. Works by Ray Kurzweil are really interesting to read if you're interested in that stuff.
Sending emails? Who does that? That's like so 90s. Lol WTF? Who was sending emails in the 90s? The extra ridiculous thing is that that's not even really a generational thing but more of a basic kid vs adult thing. In the early my friends and I all used MSN Messenger and AOL chat and stuff. Emails were a more formal thing for corresponding with older relatives and poo. Emails are still a more formal thing, used for corresponding with older relatives and professional colleagues. Literally nothing has changed.
Yeah, I think this kid was just associate an adult thing with old people. 15-year-olds don't really need email. They just assumed middle-aged people still use email like it's a holdover from when they were young.
You still need email. You can't get an account on the other things without email, and all formal work, school correspondence is sent through email. Wells Fargo won't send my bill as a snap.
Email is still the primary form of communication in most professional work environments. Everything else is just some company's proprietary messaging platform.
I had an email account in high school in the early 90s. See, I was a dork. And there were literally 2 other people I knew who had email. Occasionally you'd email someone you met on Usenet or something. But honestly I would get like 1 email a week and it was almost always from someone I would talk to in person. See, we had more classes together that weren't computer lab than were. I was excited to go to college. See, everyone would get an email address there, and I thought I'd get tons of email. But all I got was confused emails from the older profs and homework updates from the tech-savvy Taz. Although, Douglas Adams used to hang around the HHGTTG Usenet board and emailed me back once, so that was hella cool.
I still have my very first Hotmail account. Lol. Use the internet to talk to people you see every day. The Douglas Adams thing is sick. Edit, MSN or ICQ or Winamp. Nostalgia.
I was in college in '95 and received extra credit in a class for signing up for a university email. My kid was in awe. Dude, I'm older than Google.
I feel old. I started college in '83. Hell, I've been using Linux for 20 years now.
Yeah, kids think Google is a typo, and are amazed that we were sending each other funny videos before YouTube was a thing. Granted, they were entirely streeter dance or similar.
My mom is the opposite. She thought that fax machines were invented in the 1990s. I found this out when I was complaining about a government agency wanting something be faxed, and my mom said, "It's the way of the world now." I asked what she meant and she that all businesses use fax. I asked some follow-up questions, and she said that fax machines were invented in the 1990s.
She was only off by 150 years.
Yeah, I don't need to be cool, never was, why try now, but I get you. My kid is 2, not 20. In the 90s I was on our local Freenet so much that my parents bought a second phone line for the 2600 baud modem. I still remember my auto-generated username. That acceleration is still happening. Could you believe we'd hear the phrase, Tesla offers beta of full self-driving download to existing cars 10 years ago? Now it's in the news and met with, cool. Anyway, British royal family is in the news.
Understood, and it's really interesting to think about. I think teenagers I work with don't have the further-reaching pop culture knowledge that was common and expected for millennials. Like someone from '85 likely knows the theme song to Gilligan's Island 1960s and The Brady Bunch 1960s or Happy Days 1970s, even though this is for the generations above us. But we still were exposed basic TV channels then cable and got it and can reference it and we did, ad nauseum, remade movies, callback jokes, Bueller, Rudy, etc. etc. So I often get the impression many teens think The Simpsons is very, very old BC. They weren't indoctrinated with watching the reruns or Sunday showing BC. They have choices, and so they can't reach as far back as we did BC. We had lack of options and they have all the options. I don't think I can play the theme song for Saved by the Bell or 90,210 and assume or even expect many of the teens I know to recognize it.
I know the Brady Bunch, Gilligan's Island, Happy Days, I Dream of Jeannie and I Love Lucy much better than I know anything about Saved by the Bell or 90,210, but I think that's due to Nick at Night.
I remember my first email in the early 90s. It was sent on a BBS and I was so stoked that it only took 2 hours for it to get to California.
I used to be with it, but then they changed what asterisk it was.
Now what's it is weird and scary to me.
It'll happen to you.
I told my students my outdated jokes were for me and to laugh at them even if they don't get them.
So they changed what it is and now what's it isn't it and what's it is weird and scary to you.
Slowly, dude, it's been so long that the clothes we consider uncool are cool again. I'm already being attacked for side parting my hair and wearing skinny jeans FFS.
Right, remember the Rock meme where he was wearing this tight black turtleneck and a gold chain? That poo is back in now. WTF.
I swear to God if I see some JNCOs come back, you better believe that's a paddlin'.
Oh, they are definitely trying. I've seen it.
Makes me realize why me understanding Bueller made my one teacher very happy. I went to high school starting in 08 around the time you're talking about.
That was my last joke. Around 2014-2015 students stopped getting it. They would look around for Bueller and not laugh.
I don't get this, though. I've had more than a few professors, even co-workers who are older than me make the Bueller reference and then be like, you guys are too young to get it, to a room full of people born 88 to 94, 1 second later before people have time to react. Like, hasn't pretty much everyone seen that movie? It came out almost 40 years ago lol. I'm 29, and have probably seen it 15 times starting when I was like 13. After a few times of people between the ages of 38 and 55 making the same joke, when it isn't necessarily accurate, it starts to come across as condescending.
Yeah, it frequently played on broadcast TV throughout the 90s and 2000s. It came out before I was born, but like you I have seen it multiple times because it was a movie that was on TV growing up.
Similarly, had a professor tell me he loved me as a student purely because I understood his reference to African and European swallows.
Who are these children who don't under Holy Grail references? Because they need to be strapped down and forced to watch it. Or turned into a newt.
They'll get better.
Monty Python is timeless. My HS-age sons get those references.
My college professor lit up on the Zoom call when I said my favorite movie is Ferris Bueller's Day Off and stopped to call my friend Jenny at 8,675,309.
Lol. I still love explaining to cashiers why there are a bajillion names signed up under loyalty accounts for 867-5309. Though, sadly, Safeway has caught on and disallowed it.
At least be known at the old professor with dad jokes. Bad corny jokes are better than no jokes. Some of your students still appreciate that, I assure you.
Back when I used to have to teach a classroom class, now I just do one-on-one lessons all day. The things students most appreciated were my dad jokes and my cell phone policy, to wit, cell phones, I don't care if you use them during class. You have to manage your attention at all other points in your day, driving, in court, on a date, so you should be used to it by now. Just don't distract other students. If you miss something because you had headphones on watching Netflix in class, that's on you. Also, if you have your keyboard sounds turned on, stop it.
I've experienced this, and I'm not even a teacher. Just from talking to the people a decade or so younger than me, I realize there was a cultural shift in what younger generations are exposed to. People like me who were born in the 1990s and before that didn't have a choice if we wanted to watch certain TV shows or look stuff up online. If the only thing playing on your Friday night was Gene Kelly in Singing in the Rain, you either had to endure that or find something else to do, like read a book or go outside. I think that's why the older generations recognize so many pop culture references and younger ones don't. They've been exposed to everything while the current generations have the choice to filter out what they don't like and unintentionally cut themselves off from a lot of content. Nowadays it feels like the only time younger people will recognize an old film or book would be if it was made fun of on Family Guy.
Nowadays it feels like the only time younger people will recognize an old film or book would be if it was made fun of on Family Guy, provided they actually watch Family Guy.
I guess I'll update it with, if it was made fun of by some guy on YouTube.
I went to uni from 2008 to 2012 and I had one professor that made a bunch of a Jethro Tull references, 1970s, and I was the only one who laughed. Do you profs appreciate the rare oddball who does understand your references?
I certainly do.
I can't offer what my favorite science teacher told us in regards to why he chose to keep teaching for so long. He was in his 70s and had been teaching since he was in his 20s. I'll quote him as best as I can remember: the kids change, the clothes change, the attitudes change. The science changes. I lived through times when women couldn't learn science like men and when people refused to teach people because of the color of their skin. The one thing that doesn't change is the hunger for knowledge. I get new children every year who I truly enjoy teaching. Some kids don't want to learn, but there are always the special few that find wonder in science. I continue teaching for those kids. The ones who find the wonder and joy behind science. There are more and more of you each year and it truly fills me with joy, so I'm guessing his favorites were the kids in his last teaching year 2008 when he died. In the case of our food tech teacher, she hated all children equally.
My science teacher told me, when I went to university, I didn't attend the classes, I didn't do any of the homework, I just showed up and passed the tests. When I wasn't at work or taking a test, I was at the bar having fun. Eventually I had to get my poo together because they made it where you couldn't pass the classes if you had poor attendance and low homework grades. You remind me of my younger self. I think you must have had the other science teacher.
You are all equally worthless. I hate each and every one of you with a passion hotter than the stove you stand in front of. I only teach here to hope that one day you will slip up and cause a fire. I do not hate you because you are a girl. I do not hate you because you are a boy. I hate you because you are you. Now today we will be making pancakes. If you mess this up, I will shove my hand so far up your A*S you will look like a Muppet. Food tech teacher.
I only teach here to hope that one day you will slip up and cause a fire. I'm in stitches. Just like the food tech teacher wants.
I'm still a new teacher, but what I've really enjoyed so far is using slang around students. Saying yeet gets a completely different reaction from 10th graders' eye rolls and 5th graders' glee, and I love either one.
I teach middle school and one of my favorite things is making references to be cringy.
Even better is using references wrong. Example: great point, Jessica. That was a very yeet observation.
This is the way. Does this apply to the misuse of dabs too? E.g. for the last time, Carson, put your phone away right now. Swift action double dab.
Lol, I do dabs incorrectly to mess with my kid all the time.
Shizzle into a yeet dab, it's totes poggers for swags.
Former teacher here. After you dab at the wrong time, walk into a doorframe. It slays them.
Oh, so y'all are doing that on purpose?
It's some of the cheapest entertainment around.
Wow, I always thought you guys were lame. It's not that you are lame, you all are just way bigger brain than we are.
Our kid, it is our source for daily entertainment. Now you know the secret.
Embarrassing teenagers is extremely easy and quite entertaining.
As a teenager, I agree.
It's funny to see teenagers think that their parents are clueless. I have a 13-year-old, and have no idea that we're effing with them.
Like they really still think I believe the PS4 is at Nintendo's. I bought it and all those games, of course I know what it is. But messing with them is hilarious.
Absolutely. Or I love to play dumb. Just the other day I got back to class from an impromptu meeting and a girl says, "So you gonna spill the tea?" I looked at her confused and explained I'm more of a coffee guy myself, but I don't see myself spilling any either way. The rolling laughter and mock assumptions of how clueless I am is an odd type of entertainment I can't describe. Or I also love music references, as I'm a bit of a music hobbyist of any genre. Students were talking about what their rap name would be. One guy said, Lil Tito, like Lil Nas but I'm Tito. I just said, ah Nas. Old school, then started singing, If I Ruled the World. They all looked at me like I was crazy. Like WTF? For me that's the moment that I look for the ones that have a bit more rap history in their palette. No one seemed to get it.
I think I'm just weird, but I think adults using current slang ironically is funny.
Ms. Last Will and Tentacle, I have a question.
Yeet, that's lit. So what's the question, fam?
Devices and helicopter parenting, which doesn't mean parents who are intensely concerned about their children's futures, but parents who never leave their damn kids alone.
I'm a millennial and have only taught Zoomers, but yes, so many helicopter parents. They text their kids in the middle of class, call them everything. It drives me nuts.
I remember getting my first cell phone in high school and my parents told me it was just for emergencies. One time I got a call in the middle of class and it was my dad. I got up and went out into the hall to answer despite the teacher's threats to punish me. I answer in a panic to find out my dad isn't happy I've been staying up late and wants to talk that night. I was furious. All the parental menace he had mustered completely fell apart as I tore into him for calling me on a cell phone that had been designated as for emergencies only in the middle of class. Ended up going back inside and apologizing to the teacher. Other than that though, my parents would give me my space and only investigate when my grades slipped, which they did sometimes.
I remember running out of class in college to take a call and the professor making fun of me, saying my generation are all addicted to technology and can't ignore a single call. So I took the call, came back in and said, "Thanks for the call out. I have to go. My grandmother died in the hospital." I was so goddamn mad at him for being such a jackass.
How did he react?
Honestly, I don't know. I left right then to go be with my family. This was in 2007, and that whole year was hot garbage. Grandma died in February, my dad on the first day of summer vacation, my uncle 1 week exactly after my dad, and my aunt in October, so most of it runs together.
Holy poo man, that sucks.
Thanks. It was a long time ago, all good. Funny story, my grandmother, father, and uncle had their services at the same funeral home in town, since my grandfather had been gone for a while, and my uncle was living with my grandmother. Once they were both gone, my family needed to clean up and sell their house. My second cousins offered to help with some heavy lifting, which was a tremendous help, but didn't know how to get there. So their mother went along and offered directions. She drove them to the funeral home since she'd been there so much that year already. Muscle memory.
As Gen X, my parents were the opposite. They would vanish for 3 or 4 days, and leave the 11 and 12-year-old to mind the 2 toddlers. We're all pretty independent now.
My mom is Gen X and she refers to her generation as the neglected generation. Kids weren't actually neglected, but they were also able to pretty much anything as long as they eventually came home.
My mum is Gen X and she refers to her generation as the neglected generation. The more common term is latchkey generation, because those kids would have their house keys around their necks as they were expected to come home to empty houses after school.
I was one of those. There were a few of us in the neighborhood, though, and my house was always the after-school hub despite not having a pool, which Jay always complained about because his house did have a pool, but Jay's house also had a creepy dad, and mine just had my single, working mom and her love of making sandwiches while drinking Miller Lite. We had a lot of fun back then. No internet, though. I think that's eventually gonna be the defining thing about Gen X, the last generation to effectively grow up without the internet and social media.
Not an exaggeration. Born in '72. I did so many things that should have gotten me killed or jailed. In historical comparison, I was a complete poohead, yet totally within the norm for my peer group. My parents had no idea what I was up to. I now have a 15-year-old. I don't delude myself into thinking that I know everything he's doing, but I'm sure as hell a lot more dialed into what's happening in his life.
My mom tells me her teenage stories and they're much worse than anything I've ever done. Probably the worst thing you have to worry about him doing is vaping or WD.
My mom is Gen X and was very much the same. Me as well. It drives me nuts to have students go, "I can't put .my phone in my backpack because my mom will get mad if I don't answer her text." And yet the same parents refuse to take my calls.
Life 360 is the Hitler of our insane parents.
Yeah, honestly, F Life 360.
I'm not a teacher, but both my mother and sister are. They stated 2 big differences. Point 1, social media changed how kids behave. A lot. Way more bullying is done online now and less of it is physically violent. Point 2, certain trends don't really exist anymore. The punk, emo stuff from the 2000s isn't present today, but there is a stronger group of gamer, internet kids that play Fortnite and use TikTok. Also, there are way more outspokenly gay students.
Kids should be seen and not heard.
You can always tell a Milford man.
Seen not heard, would be such a seen thing to say.
The punk emo poo still exists where I live and I got off high school last year. They're usually the artsy kids.
Punk FTW.
I worked with kids for a few years in the mid-2010s and there was a big push for gay acceptance and pride. Well, one day, the whole group of 10-year-old boys came out as gay. All of them. My boss was genuinely considering an "it's okay to be straight" campaign, with the best intentions.
This genuinely sounds like some sitcom storyline.
Working with kids basically is a sitcom.
This might date me a bit, but if you ever watched Queer as Folk, US, not UK, these two guys had adopted a teenager off the street, and one day, the kid had to come out as straight to them. He'd been tricking to make money while he was on his own, so he'd been sort of assumed to be gay, but it was just for pay, as it were. He had to sit his dads down and talk to them about how he was actually straight and liked this girl. The dads were all upset, pseudo-upset. One of them was like, "Now I know how my parents felt." It was an amusing scene.
Those niche cultures exist, they just don't need to be seen as rebellious anymore because the internet has let us fracture off into other splinters. I'm Gen Z and I was one of a few punk kids, but there were like 60 to 70 cliques in my school rather than like 10 monoliths. All of us shared similar culture through internet experiences, not through unified struggle.
In my mind, kids have always been good at heart, but society and their upbringing is what ultimately shapes or corrupts them. Unfortunately, I think more kids nowadays have mental health issues since they unconsciously compare themselves to their peers. The difference is 20+ years ago kids only compared themselves to the few hundred kids in their school. Nowadays, they are comparing themselves to the millions of kids they see online.
Do you think that the perceived uptick of mental health issues could be attributed to the focus that we now put on mental health? I feel like issues in the past would have gone unnoticed just due to the lack of awareness.
I'm sure everything has played a part. It's not anyone's fault. In all honesty, most kids are the same regardless of the generation they were born in. If you strip down everything, the same percentage of kids choose to apply themselves or at least attempt to learn something while in the classroom. What has changed? The parents and their attitudes. A lot more of them have opinions on how their child should learn. And unfortunately, it's not always a good opinion.
Honestly, it is not so much the generation but the age group and the relative interest, and if you connect with the students or not, and they connect with you as a teacher and respect you as an educator who has their best interests at heart. I like the younger students for their curiosity and eagerness and excitement when new ideas are being introduced or there is some challenge, learning-related contest going on in the class. This gets more difficult to cultivate as a group energy level in the puberty years, and easier afterwards. But I've had some kids in the 12 to 14 age group come in during lunch to continue their activity just because they were so engaged in what we were doing, and I was cool with it as I ate my lunch in the classroom, and therefore my classroom, I taught computers, so other labs were often locked after classes, was always open. It is very obvious when you see the interest and level of engagement from a class that is ready to learn. It is almost like when an engine is revving up and all cylinders are firing in sequence. You can really feel the energy. But you notice the differences as some classes just click with their teacher more than others, even in the same year. For those who may be wondering why that is, I like to think of each class as a sort of team, as in sports. I suspect that if there is a certain threshold of active, curious and interested students in each class, then that interest level and energy just is infectious and becomes the overall mood of the class. A few leaders in the class can raise the energy of the whole team. Of course, it's the same story if there are enough disinterested students in a class who honestly don't want to be there and have no interest in learning. Sprinkle in a few more who prefer to disrupt a class for laughs, and that just drains the interest and excitement right out of the room unless the teacher or occasionally some students can reassert the need for respect so learning can continue uninterrupted. It can really be apparent when you are teaching the same exact lesson to different classes on the same day, as you will see which ones are into it and which ones just aren't.
Your point about a threshold for interested, disinterested individuals rang true in my high school experience. Class before mine, seen as a bunch of troublemakers, unfocused, lazy, that kind of thing. There were a few kids at the top seen as try-hards, but the positive attitude toward school diminished very quickly from the top 4 or 5 rankings. My class, we were competitive in everything. The cool kids were athletes that expected A's and B's in class. Competed in academic events and between sporting events. Very few people who didn't care. Even set the annual fundraising record our senior year. The last person in our top quarter ranking would have made it into the top 10% of the class before mine. It was a pretty big contrast between our two class years. There were enough sociable, academically competitive people in my class that everyone kind of felt like they needed to work hard to stand out. But there were only a few in the class above us that showed interest in school, and it just wasn't enough to make the rest of the kids feel like they needed to try. I also think labels play a role in this. That class had the lazy label for a long time. I think it set the bar low for a lot of kids. They're all doing fine now, so it wasn't really a big deal in the end. But there were definitely differences.
97 sarcastic, grungy, smoking more cigarettes, more clique Y and edgy 07 petty, attention-starved, overwhelmed, but much nicer 17 under so many layers of irony and memes they don't even know who they are anymore or care. There's no point in being creative or devolving a personality, anything you could think of has already been done.
07 petty, attention-starved, overwhelmed, but much nicer. I was a sophomore in college that year and I don't think I've seen a more accurate description. TBH, it still fits lol.
I wish I used Tinder. This would be my bio.
Zoomers have all the downsides of millennials and none of the hope.
Or, I like Zoomers. My only knock on them is that, like absolutely every other generation out there, they give millennials poo.
I'm Generation X and I appreciate the millennials for giving the boomers so much poo and leaving us well out of it.
I feel like Gen Z doesn't really hate millennials. I think the media is pushing that narrative. In my experience being Gen Z, we just hate boomers. Maybe Gen X too.
Gen Z here. Millennials are like the older siblings that take all the poo and do all the rebellion so that you can, hopefully, just lead a chill life.
Thank you. I feel like as time goes on it's becoming more difficult to tell when somebody is serious or joking, because somebody who was being incredibly ironic would say, "I'm being 100% literal and am not exaggerating in any way or attempting to be funny." Nobody has real identities because you can't tell what's fake and what's fakeness. There also really is no hope for being an individual anymore because you now have access to Googling the existence of a person you would have wanted to become, except they already have done your dreams better than your dream self did. And if your dream self can't compare, how is your regular self comparable? So you just turn into a sad sack of self-pity, hatred, and laziness.
Pretty much the same thing if an NPC in GTA 5 becomes self-aware.
Thank you for watching. We upload new videos every day, so be sure to come back for more fun. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed the video.